Morning, Rabbi.
Morning, Rabbi.
See all of you.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning.
So we are on page Mem Zayin Amud Base 47b, and we learned a number of interesting little rules here. We were speaking about the number one, the law of what is a Am Haaretz, someone who might know a lot, but they were not Meshamish Talmidei Chachamim. They didn't hang out with the scholars to understand the rulings behind the laws, and that because of that, they're not really eligible to be considered a chaver, which refers to like a Talmud Chacham. Instead, they're considered an Am Haaretz. And to the extent that it's questionable if you can do a zimun with such a person. Now, of course, we said that nowadays we aren't didactic. We aren't careful with who we do a zimun with. We do a zimun with anyone who's Jewish. But there was a time when you were careful who you did a zimun with. In fact, to the extent that one of the great rabbis here in the Gemara, he refused to do a zimun with another of the great rabbis from the Gemara. And Rami Bar Chama, the Gemara said, didn't want to do a zimun with Rav Menashia Bar Tachlifa. So Rami Bar Chama felt that Rav Menashia Bar Tachlifa, he's knowledgeable, he learned Mishnah, Chumash, but he doesn't know he doesn't have the discussions of the rabbis that explain the reasons. Therefore, he didn't want to do a zimun with him. And the Gemara concludes and says that he passed away before his time. And Rava explained the reason he passed away was because Rami Bar Chama was overly strict, and he judged Rav Menashia wrong. He thought that Rav Menashia Bar Tachlifa was not knowledgeable in the reasons behind it. He didn't study with the rabbis and get involved in their discussions. And the Gemara says it wasn't really correct. He really did get and find out the reasons behind the laws, and you misjudged him. And therefore, because Rami Bar Chama did not include him in his zimun, and he insulted him, so to speak, and he was wrong about it. He didn't really do his research properly. Therefore, he passed away early. And the Gemara continues and talks about the law of rabbinic tevel, which is some produce that was not tithed properly. If produce was not tithed properly, so the law is you're not allowed to eat from it. Now, normally that's a biblical law, and it carries with it a death penalty. But however, there is a rabbinic type of tevel that rabbinically you're obligated to separate tithings. And if you didn't separate tithings, you would be transgressing a rabbinic law. It wouldn't be a biblical law. And on rabbinic laws, of course, the penalties are never a death penalty and so on. And so the Gemara thought that if you ate the produce that was not tithed rabbinically, meaning there was a tithing that was only obligated rabbinically, and you didn't do it, and you ate that, the Gemara thought that maybe you might be able to do a zimun together with others, or you might not. It's only rabbinic. There's room to think of it either way. And the Mishnah says that no, you cannot do a zimun. And you can't do a zimun. The Gemara says talking about tevel midrabanan. And what is the case of that? What is the case where it's only obligated rabbinically to give tithings? And the example is if it's a planting pot that doesn't have any hole in it, so it's not considered biblically obligated in tithing because it's not really planted in the ground. It's not the normal way of growing things. It's in a pot. It's potted, but it doesn't even have a hole. If it had a hole in it, then we say it absorbs from the ground. It's considered like the ground. And this laws about the utzitz she'ein or nakov, an utzitz, a planting pot that doesn't have a hole in it, is applicable to many areas in the code of law, believe it or not. It has to do with Shabbos, the laws of Shabbos. Does it apply to, is there a problem of moving such a plant muktzah? Is it, if the laws of Shemitah, are you allowed to plant such a plant during Shemitah or harvest such a plant and so on. And so these laws of a Otzet Shein Akava comes up a lot in the Gemara. It's interesting that it applies here regarding tithings. The laws of tithing of such a produce would only be rabbinic. Someone had a question. I think Ben. Ben, did you want to say something?
I wanted to say, why did the Rabbonim need to add that stricter version? How much can you grow in a pot? Even in 10 pots, how much can you grow in it?
So obviously the reason they were doing it was not to give extra food to the Kohanim and the Levites, because there's not so much food there, you're saying.
Yeah.
So it can't be, the purpose was not to give extra bonus money, bonus fruits to the Kohanim and Levites. It must have had to do with the fact that we're afraid if someone plants it, they'll make a mistake between a pot that doesn't have a hole and a pot that does have a hole, and therefore they'll end up transgressing the biblical law that has a very severe penalty, and by mistake. So therefore, probably something to do with the decree. It was not about getting more food.
Does the Torah talk about pots with holes in them that are the same as growing in the ground, from the ground?
So I don't believe that it says it clearly, but I believe the Gemara understands that such a pot is considered like regular growing, But
okay.
if it doesn't have a hole in it, that's where the rabbis understood that that's not considered regular growing. But they made a decree that we're going to treat it that way just so that people don't make mistakes.
Well, maybe it would have been easier if they said any pot, because there is dirt in each pot.
Well, what do you mean? Now they did say that any pot is. They did say that any
one has a hole and a similar, apparently connected to the ground. But if you put pot in a pot without a hole, it's still dirt.
Okay.
So it's still growing in the dirt.
Can I answer that?
Okay.
I grow things. Okay. So when you have a pot that has a hole in it, the roots can come out through the hole. And if the pot is sitting on the ground, the roots go down into the ground. So I've had pots that I can't lift them up, even though it's in a pot, because the roots went down into the ground and now it's attached to the ground. If you have a pot that doesn't have a hole in it, those roots never come out of the pot. So it is never attached to the ground.
But it's still growing in ground.
No, it's growing in a pot. It's not growing in earth. It's not growing in the.
Well, you took it from the earth and put it in a pot.
But it's not attached to the earth.
That's what you're saying. I understand that, but it's still earth. It's not.
Well, you're not accepting the idea that it has to be connected to earth, which emanates all being. Ben, there's a wall between the pot and the earth,
and the ground,
whatever you want to call it. Okay,
yeah.
So it doesn't connect.
Yeah.
You're not listening.
I'm listening.
It can be earth. I can put it in a glass jar, okay, and grow something. But eventually, the water is going to destroy the plant because it's not connected, quote unquote, Mother Earth. And to me, that's what the philosophy is, that it goes back to the Creator by going back to the earth.
It's exactly it.
But it is interesting, but that's what Simone is saying, that it has something to do with the fact that there's a hole that somehow connects it. It does absorb from the earth, and it gives it the power, the strength to actually break through the pot. That's very interesting.
It doesn't have to break through the pot.
As long as it's in
the hole,
right.
It goes through.
Just come right
by
the hole.
That means it absorbs.
By its nature, it goes through into the earth.
It absorbs from the earth. It has the ability to connect to the earth and absorb from the earth and so on. There's definitely more of a real growth in such a pot.
If I may, this sort of brings, even though it didn't happen during those times, the whole idea of creating artificial beings or plants that are not natural because they move so that may have, again, I don't know what halakha says about artificially created, modified genetically
Right.
plants or animals. So again, it's a monster to some
Yeah.
people, and it's unnatural.
Right.
What about
So-
growing things in water instead of earth?
But that's
Right,
part.
right, that's
A lot of
hydroponic.
things are grown in water now.
Right, right. So that's an interesting thing as well.
Right.
There is a big discussion about meat that they're soon making from,
from cells. from
genetically
cells.
modified from
Yes.
cells, and they're going to claim that the meat is pareve, supposedly. That's the latest thing, and it's not going to have cholesterol or
Right.
saturated fat. So there's a very interesting things coming up. Yes, Susan.
One more thing about not having a hole in a pot. Eventually, the plant becomes root bound and dies.
It kills itself.
Cannot survive.
If you don't replant it, you can
Get
replant it.
planting. I'm telling you, the root bound plants do not survive. I can attest to that.
I haven't for years.
Right, but you keep replanting it at a time when it's futile to keep replanting something. It's artificial. It's not going back to Mother Earth or Father Earth, whatever we want to call it.
Transgender. Bigender, whatever. Okay, now we're going to continue. So we're talking about the laws of Meiser Rishon, the first tithing that Truma was not separated from. And the Gemara says, well, if you didn't separate the original Truma, obviously you can't do a zimun when you eat that type of bread that was you never to separated Truma. That's really a big biblical prohibition. And the Gemara answers, no, we're not dealing with such a case. We're dealing with a case where, well, the case is not as simple. We're not dealing with such a simple case. We're dealing with a case where the Levite took the his 10%, his Meiser, after it was made into a pile, after the grain was made into a pile, it was winnowed, threshed and winnowed, made into a pile, gave 10% to the Levite, and you forgot or you missed out and you didn't give the Kohen his 2% that he's supposed to get, called Truma. You didn't give it to him first. And now the Levite gave the Kohen the percentage that goes to the Kohen from the Meiser, but he never gave the original amount because the original owner never gave that original amount. And the Gemara thought that might be, you might be able to get away with that and do a zimun, because there is a verse that says that the Levite only takes one truma to the Kohen, not two. He doesn't take an extra truma. And here, you missed out, true. We missed out in the original truma, but there is a verse that says you don't do two trumas to the Kohen. You missed out the first one. Okay, it's missed out. It's over. Now he does his truma that's from his tithing. He does his truma. The original one that was missed out, the original owner missed out on that. Okay, it's missed out, but now I don't have to do it. We have a verse that says that. And so the Gemara thought the Mishnah thought that you might think that would be good enough. Now you did your one truma and you have Meiser and you did your one truma. And you could do a zimun with other people. The Gemara answers that no, there's a difference between when you missed out in the original truma. Did you miss out because the Levite took it before it was made into a pile? Or did you miss out in the original truma after it was made into a pile, and that's when the Levite got it? There's a difference. If the Levite got it later after it was made into a pile, then it's considered obligated in the original truma even afterwards, and you would need to do two trumas in order to be able to eat the produce. And there's another verse that implied that hints to this that there is a situation where you are obligated in giving two trumas and so on, and therefore this would be fall into that category, and therefore you cannot do a zimun on this type of produce, which is Meiser, that only one truma was taken from it, not the other one. So that's this Gemara is really connected to a previous Gemara that we learned earlier, and it fills in both sides of the coin. Okay, do you want to say something, Robert? Or?
Oh no, I'm sorry.
So then the Gemara talks about the next thing Gemara talks about is about redeeming Meiser and redeeming it on to money and bringing the money into Jerusalem, and then buying produce with that money, buying food with that money. And I should mention that we just learned in the Chumash, yesterday's Chumash that we read about Go'el Yigal Ish Mima'asari. If a person wants to redeem his Meiser, and he has to add a fifth. I don't know if you caught on, but that was yesterday. We read it in the Torah portion yesterday about Chol Meiser Haaretz Mizera Haaretz Mipri Ha'etz LaHashem Hu Kodesh LaHashem. All the Meiser of the land. Talking about the second tithing, that it's from the produce of the land, either from the grain or from the grapes, the wine, the oil or the wine, and it goes to Hashem, and you're supposed to enjoy it in Jerusalem. And if you redeem it from yours, you have to add a fifth. So that was the Chumash of Parsha B'chukaisei, the end of B'chukaisei. So anyway, so now we're talking about, you have this Meiser. We're gonna learn this inside. You have Meiser and you want to redeem it, and you redeem it on the wrong thing. We're gonna soon see what that means. So let me tell you where we're starting. We're starting, there are three types of lines. There's the small lines, medium-sized lines, and the large lines. We're gonna be in the medium-sized lines on page 47b, the fifth medium-sized line. Meiser Sheni v'chulu. Meiser Sheni, etc. That's the fifth medium-sized line. Shita, the Gemara says, this is obvious that if Meiser Sheni was not redeemed, again, if you look at the Mishnah, which was on page 45, the Mishnah said that the case was Meiser Sheni v'hegdish shaloi nifter. Meiser Sheni, which is the second tithing, which is supposed to enjoy yourself or your friends in yourself with your friends in Jerusalem, rejoicing over what God has given you. So you take that Meiser Sheni, it's called the second tithing, and you're supposed to celebrate in Jerusalem, but you didn't. Now what happened was it was not redeemed, and you ate it before bringing it to Jerusalem. Now normally you can do that. So for example, let's say you have a whole case of grapes, and it's too heavy for you to carry to Jerusalem. So what do? You switch the grapes over for money. You switch it onto a $100 bill. You say this $100 bill is instead of the grapes. Now you eat the grapes. You're here in Florida. You eat the grapes in Florida, and I shouldn't say Florida because it's really Israel produce. So you really the produce here in Florida, you don't have to give tithing from in Florida produce. But let's say you lived in Eilat, or you lived in Tzfas. So you lived in Tzfas in Israel, and you have a case of grapes, a whole box of grapes. So you switch it over for a $100 bill, and you go to, and now you just take the $100 bill to Jerusalem. Now, before you go to Jerusalem, you want to eat some grapes. So, and you, of course, you exempted them, you redeemed them. So you enjoy the grapes, right? It's not holy anymore because you redeemed it for the $100 bill. You switch it over $100 bill. Now, what happens if you didn't switch it over for the $100 bill? You want to eat those grapes. Those grapes are Meiser Sheni. They have a certain level of holiness. They're supposed to be eaten in Jerusalem, and they're considered Hashem's, and you're not allowed to eat them in Tzfas. If you switch it over for the $100 bill, now the $100 bill takes on that holiness, and the grapes are downgraded in holiness. You're allowed to enjoy them wherever you are. Eat them in Tzfas. You don't have to go to Jerusalem. You can eat them wherever you want. You can eat them already because you redeemed it for the $100 bill. Now, the thing is that the Mishnah says that if you ate the grapes without redeeming it, you cannot do zimun. The Gemara asks here, the first word of the Gemara, pshita. This is obvious. What do you mean? Of course you can't do a zimun on this treif, considered like treif. You ate something non-kosher. You're eating these grapes that are not allowed to be eaten here. This is like not eating non-kosher. You can't do a zimun on non-kosher food. This is grapes that were not redeemed. So the Gemara answers like tricha sheniftu. They were redeemed, but they weren't redeemed properly. So what does this mean? So it's teaching us a law that there are certain rules about how it's redeemed. Meiser Sheni, what's the case? Meiser Sheni Kegoin Shepadoy Al Gabi Asimon. Meiser Sheni, the case is that you redeemed it for a type of coin that doesn't have any form on the coin. It's an unminted coin. It's a coin that wasn't engraved. It's called an asimoin. They used to have asimoins in Israel. I don't know. Was you remember that, Ben? They used to use.
It was
Yeah,
for telephones, for making telephone calls.
Now, was that coin totally unengraved? There was no engravement on it.
No, it did. It said,
It did.
said that it's a
Real asimoin.
but it had monetary value, a certain value.
Right.
Right. I remember those 20,
It
25
didn't
years.
say how much it is,
Uh-huh.
just that it has value.
Right. So anyway, the real asimoin is something that doesn't have a tsura, doesn't have a form on the, no engraved writing on the coin or no engraved picture on the coin. That's called an asimoin. And if you redeem Meiser Sheni for that, it doesn't work. Rachmana Amar in the Torah says regarding redeeming Meiser Sheni, V'tzarto hakesef biyodecha. Literally, it means you will tie the coin, the coins in your hand, or the money, tie the money in your hand, to your hand. And that means that you will take that money to Jerusalem, and you can leave the grapes here in Tzfas and take the money to Jerusalem. But the word sarta, the Gemara makes a little a teaching, a lesson. It has a drash, a drush, some type of a way of reading it, that it says kesef sheyesh olav tzura, that the word sarta hints to, it gives us an extra hint that the word v'tzarta also means surah. Surah means a form. So it means that the coin has to also have a form in it. So literally the verse means that you're tying this money, you take it with you. But because it uses that term, it's hinting us that it also has to be money with a form. Keser sheyesh olav tzura, and that excludes money that doesn't have a form, that if you redeemed it with it, it is not considered redeemed, and the produce is still Meiser Sheni produce. Yes, Simone.
Rabbi,
So therefore, excuse me, so therefore you shouldn't be able to use $100 bill or any kind of bill. You have to actually have a coin, because coins are only the things where you have a stamp on it that's engraved. A bill is printed.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you for bringing that up.
yeah, I wanted to say on the asimon, there is a hole in it. There was a hole in it. So you knew it's not money, it's an asimon.
Interesting.
We call those tokens here.
Yeah, tokens, right.
But if I may, in the discussion, is because of the coin is called a slug, which essentially means it's worthless on its face value. In the text here in front of us, it says it's a slug.
But it's still worth something. It's used for a purpose.
But it's only transferable. It does not possess itself any value outside of the interaction that you use it for.
It's not marked how much the value is.
Exactly. It's what,
not
right,
money.
exactly.
It's not money.
It's not money. It's just a vehicle to do what
It's
you
like
want to
chips
do.
in gambling, in other words.
You've been gambling again. You're right. That's
No,
right.
no, I
Okay.
don't want anything, but I'm just saying that's my,
You're a good observer. Right. Okay.
no, my grandparents would play poker. A penny was worth a penny. That was their chip. The pennies were the chips.
Here.
So Rashi over here tells us that the asimoin is the asimoin. Rashi says, let me get it. Kesef shalei nikba b'tzura. There is no tzura on it. There's no form. Now there are commentaries that say that there really is a form. It's just not used money. It's not money that you can't really use. It's only used at a time of great necessity. So it's not a real coin. It's almost like a Canadian coin here in America. You're really not used, but if you sometimes can get away with it, something like that maybe. So it's normally not used as a proper coin. That's the way another commentary explains asimoin. But the bottom line is that if you redeemed this Meiser Sheni wrong, you cannot eat it you cannot eat the produce and you need to redeem it another time. So now, with regard to the fact that it's that a bill is not engraved, what Simone brought up, that is an interesting thought, because on the one hand, it does have a picture on it. So, you know, what is the main concept here? That it has to have a tsura. You know, what does that really refer to? Now, at the same time, there could be another issue of a $100 bill, and that would be the fact that a $100 bill is not intrinsically valuable. $100 bill is just a sign that they have money that's backing that $100 bill.
It's a
Now it's
promise.
even worse, because we don't even have the money. We have a loan, and China has the money that's backing. Supposedly, I don't even know if we can believe that, but supposedly someone has money that's backing. So it could be that a $100 bill won't work, and my example was not a good example for other reasons. And it could also be that it's not a good example because of what Simone brought up, but it is an easier example to give, a $100 bill. But yeah, there could be issues with and that's why for like when you redeem a firstborn, they actually use silver coins. Silver coins, they are intrinsically valuable, and that would be maybe I don't know the laws of Meiser Sheni well, but it could be that you would need something that's intrinsically you know, has value in order to fulfill Meiser Sheni. It's not nowadays we don't. They don't take the Meiser Sheni to Jerusalem. Again, they redeem it, and that's in Israel. There are different ways of separating the tithings, but it's not given to the Kohen, it's not given to the Levite, and it's not you know, it's not. They don't bring it to Jerusalem to eat either, for various reasons. It has to do with Tumah and Tahara, purity and impurity. Okay, did someone else want to ask a question, or yes, Susan?
Okay, I don't understand this next translation. It says consecrated property, semicolon, in a case where he redeemed it by exchanging it for land instead of money, and the Torah states he will give the money and it will be assured to him.
Yeah. So let me read it. Okay. So that's why you know the art scroll is not good enough. You need a rabbi.
Tell me about it, really.
So the Gemara continues and says Hegdish Hegdish, which is the other example here. That the first example was Meiser Sheni, the second tithing, that you redeemed it, but you didn't redeem it properly. And the second example is Hegdish, and Hegdish, which also you redeemed, but you didn't redeem properly. And therefore, if you took from that item, which is produce, that you consecrated to God, you wanted to give it to the temple, and you were donating it to the temple, and it's a little heavy to bring there, so you redeem it for you redeem it onto some other valuable thing that's easier for you to give to the temple, and therefore, and then you'll be able to eat the produce. So, for example, you donated. You have an orange tree. You gave giving them a case of oranges, and then you realize this is a little problematic. I'm carrying a case of oranges to Jerusalem and to give to the Beis Hamikdash, the temple. It's going to be a little heavy. So you say, you know what? I'm not going to bring the oranges. Let me switch the oranges for something else that's a little lighter. I have chocolate bars. I'll bring them, or I'll switch it for money, for coins, for gold. Anyway, so you switch it for something else. So the Gemara gives an example here of what you did, and it doesn't work. You redeemed it for something else, and then you're able to eat the oranges here. Right now, you can eat the orange because you redeem it on something else. But that only is good if you eat the orange and you redeem it on something that's kosher. But if you redeem it on something you're not allowed to redeem it for, then you can't eat the orange. And if you do eat the orange, you can't do a zimun with other people. What did you redeem it on that's good, that's not good? So the Gemara's example is Hegdish shechilalu al gabe karka. You redeemed the Hegdish on ground, on earth, for land. So you said, you know what? Instead of giving this case of oranges, I have a little piece of property that's tiny in front of my house on the side that I don't use. It's an inch, a foot by a foot. Let me donate that to the temple, and they could plant there a tree there. I don't know what they could do there. They could use it as storage. So I'm going to give that to the temple. So you donate a piece of land, and so it says that you didn't redeem it for money, land. Let me just read it here. 1 second. So you didn't redeem it for land. So Rahman Amar in the Torah says, you have to give money as a redemption, and then you get to keep the item. And the hegdish, the consecrated item, becomes yours. And so because you redeemed it for property doesn't work. It has to be specifically money. And therefore, it's not, if you did redeem it for property, you cannot do a zimun if you ate that produce because it was not really redeemed. You ended up eating holy produce and it was prohibited really for you to eat it. It's like non-kosher. You can't do a zimun. Yes, Simone.
So I get the idea that it's supposed to be something that you can either bring to Jerusalem or turn into money that you can spend in Jerusalem. It's really about how.
Two things. 1 second.
Yeah.
There's Meiser Sheni and there's Hegdish. Two separate things.
Okay.
Meiser Sheni is one thing about enjoying in Jerusalem. Hegdish,
Okay.
You're not supposed to enjoy it all. You give it to the Beis Hamikdash. That's their money. I just want to make sure you're realizing there's a difference.
Okay. Yeah.
We're talking about two separate things.
But both of those things are taking place in Jerusalem. I mean, I think the thing with the land was it's not movable. There's no land that you can't move it to Jerusalem. And I thought it was appropriate, since today is Yom Yerushalayim, that we regain control.
Yeah,
of
but
Jerusalem.
The land, I don't know if you're correct about that. The Meiser Sheni is supposed to bring to Jerusalem and enjoy. The Hegdish is to give it to the person in charge. If land would be allowed, I don't know. In other words, if there wouldn't be an exception about land, I don't know if it would be problematic, because all you would have to do is write the title over to the Beis Hamikdash, and that, from my understanding, should be enough. Except that it's not allowed to do land, but it's not because the land you can't move. I believe it has to do with the fact that it's learned from there's a klal uprat uklal, meaning there's a general statement there. If you look at the verse, it says v'nasan hakesef v'kam loy, that
you pay the value.
Yosef, it's longer. Yosef chamishis kesef erkecha olav v'kam loy. That it says v'yosef, which is a general word, and kesef is a limited word. It's limiting it to money, and v'kam loy is more general. So it's called the klal upratu klal iyata don elakena prat. If you look in the beginning of the davening, we have the shleish esrei midos Torah nidreshes that have the 13 things. So there's number 6 is it's on page 26 in the Siddur. Klal upratu klal iyata don elakena prat. When you have a general rule, a limited word in a general word, so the way of deriving laws from that is that it means that it's not only that item, but it's things that are similar to that. So in other words, kesef and anything similar to kesef, and that excludes property. So the reason for not having property has to do with the way the verse is written, and not exactly, it doesn't explain it to be because the land is not movable and you can't bring it to Jerusalem. That doesn't seem to be, at least on the surface level of learning this, doesn't seem to be the reason.
But that would be the difference between
that would make sense.
other kinds of property and
Now that
and
would make
land.
sense for Meiser, but we're talking about Hegdish here.
Yeah.
That would make sense for Meiser that you're supposed to celebrate in Jerusalem. How do you celebrate with your property in Jerusalem if your property is in Sfas? But with Hegdish, I don't know if it would really apply.
Okay.
In other words, you're saying, how do you give it to the gizbar, the treasurer? And what I'm saying is, yeah, you don't have to hand it to him. You give him the title. You give him the title to the property, and he can sell it. But what they do with these type of things is they sell it. So therefore, this is a type of item that would be used. You would have a title for. You would have a star for such an item. And I think that could theoretically, we're talking in theory, because of course the Torah doesn't allow you to redeem it. But we're saying in theory, it would seem like that wouldn't be the problem. Okay. We're now at the next little piece of Gemara of Hashamish. Hashamish sha'achal pachos mikazayis. So the Mishnah said that another case you can't do zimun is if the shamish eats less than a kazayis, if he eats less than a size of an olive. So the Gemara says, Pshita, of course he can't do a zimun if someone didn't hardly ate. It's not even called eating. So how could you join a zimun? Well, our answer is I did the Tanaresha kazayis. Since then, the beginning part, it talked about a case where the shamish could join and he ate a kazayis. So it wanted to pick a case in the end, in the Seifa, in the end of the Mishnah, where it doesn't work. So it just picked a case that it's not a kazayis. But again, it's not the main point. The main point of the Mishnah was that the shamish can join even though he's not sitting with them. That was the main point. And it mentioned in the end of the Mishnah opposite cases that don't work. So it gave a case a shamish that ate less than a kazayis. But the Mishnah, the Gemara accepts the fact that this is not a major insight. But since the beginning part of the Mishnah talked about the kazayis, and that was an insight because that was telling us a special law about a shamish could even join the zimun. But Tana Seifa pachos mikazayis. So in the end of the Mishnah, it picked a case where that doesn't work. It picked a case where there's not a kazayis. Okay, now comes the next interesting case, and that has to do with a non-Jew. You don't do a zimun with a non-Jew. And the Gemara says, isn't that obvious? Pshita, it's obvious that a non-Jew is not obligated in doing the Brochos Hamazon, the grace after meal. And because a non-Jew is not obligated in doing the grace after meal, of course, he doesn't join in the zimun, right? Because he's not part of the blessing of afterwards of saying the Brochos Hamazon. So why would you think of a non-Jew joining the zimun? The Gemara answers, here we're talking about a ger that did the bris milah. He had his circumcision done. V'loy taval, and he did not do the mikvah dunk. And because he didn't do the mikvah, he's not exactly Jewish yet. Basically, what happens is they have to do the bris. After they do the bris, he has to heal. After he heals, then he can dunk in the mikvah, and then he becomes Jewish. Now, here we're talking about a ger that he had in mind to become Jewish. He had the milah done, the circumcision was done with the intention of becoming a Jewish convert, but he didn't do the mikvah. Amar Rab Zera, and Zera says, Amar Rab Yochanan, name Rab Yochanan, la'olam ein ger ad sheyimol b'yitbol. Person is not a ger until he does the bris milah and he does the dunk in the mikvah. Bekama deloy taval nachri. As long as he doesn't do the dunk in the mikvah, nachrihu, he is not Jewish. And that is what the Mishnah is telling us, that he did one thing, he didn't do the other thing. And the Mishnah is saying, in such a case, he can't do a zimun. Now, I have to tell you something very interesting about this. Yes, Ezra.
Can you translate Leolam Eino Ger, because this appears to be a contradiction. Leolam Eino Ger ad she'imol veitvot.
A person is not a convert ever until he does milah and tefillah.
So shouldn't it be Eno Nikayer? According to your definition, because to me it says he's not a ger.
He's not called a convert. I think it depends how you're referring to to him. You're talking about the act of gerus, and we could be the Gemara is talking about the person himself. We're referring to the person. He's not a ger, and you would like it to say it's not considered a gerus. It's not considered. I think that's why it's bothering you, because you're thinking of the act, and we're talking about the person. Does that maybe, does that help you? If you think about it as a person, he's not a ger.
So
until
he's not considered a ger until he actually does these two acts.
Yeah,
Okay.
He's not a complete ger.
right. Now I have to tell you, there's a very interesting story. It happened in 1848 in Eretz Yisrael. The chief rabbi there was Reb Shmuel Salant, and he was on vacation. There's a big shiloh that came up because there was a ger that a person was in the midst of converting, and he did his bris already, and he did not do the mikveh yet. Okay, he couldn't. He was healing. Anyway, Shabbos. It was Shabbos. Shabbos was about to come, and there was a temporary rabbi. His name was Reb Usher Lemel, and he was in Eretz Yisrael in Yerushalayim, and he had a discussion with this ger. The ger ended up being in a case of shiloh, of question, of dilemma. He was in a dilemma because on the one hand, a Jew has to keep Shabbos, and this ger was planning on keeping Shabbos. However, Rabbi Usher Lemel, who was this temporary rabbi in Eretz Yisrael, temporary chief rabbi over there, while Rabbi Shmuel Salant was not around. So he told him, he says, you're not Jewish yet. You're not Jewish yet because you didn't do the mikvah. And he said, therefore, you have to be mechalel Shabbos. You have to do something, transgress Shabbos. You should write something on paper, and therefore you'll be transgressing Shabbos because a non-Jew is not allowed to keep Shabbos. And since you didn't do the mikveh yet, even though you did the bris, but you didn't do the mikveh yet, he said that you cannot keep Shabbos. Now, he wasn't 100% sure of his ruling because it's a very innovative, it's a very surprising case that he's partially, like, he already did the circumcision. So he did like half of his so on the one hand, he sort of wants to keep Shabbos already. He did the circumcision already. He's like, he's there. So it's a very, a challenging case because you don't want him to transgress Shabbos if he's somewhat Jewish. But on the other hand, he didn't do the mikveh yet. So he was pretty convinced. And he told him, you should be mechalel Shabbos. You should transgress Shabbos. However, he sent letters to all the other rabbis.
11 o'clock.
And they refused. They told him, you're wrong. He is considered partially Jewish. And they and because he already did the circumcision, he does not need to be mechalel Shabbos, transgress Shabbos, because he is partially Jewish. He already started the conversion process. Now, that's a very interesting. It's very interesting. Now, I have to tell you that there's an argument in the Gemara about if you do only one and you don't do the other. You do the mikvah, you didn't do if you do the bris and you didn't do the mikvah, is that person considered Jewish or not? Now, we hold that he's not Jewish and you need to do both. But the question is there somewhere in the middle where the person has left being a non-Jew, but he has not entered being Jewish yet? And in that case, because he left being a non-Jew, it wouldn't be problematic for him to keep Shabbos because he left his non-Jewish status. Yes, Ezra.
Yeah, but Rabbi, we have a case similar to that with respect to the Kohen. If a Kohen is a Tameh and he goes and does Tevilah, okay, he can't touch Truma until the sun goes down.
Just 1 second. Let me just mute. Okay. Yeah, because he's called a Tful Yom, correct?
Okay, so it's the same kind of situation. He's only done the partial act of taking himself out of a state of tum'ah, which is exactly what the ger is. He's in a state of tum'ah, and now you're getting him to go into the state of tahara through the tevilah. Okay, and the Kohen has the same situation. He has to wait until the sun goes down because before he is considered to be completely tahor, before he can actually eat truma. So if you have that, why can't why can't people say, these are the same kinds of situations? You're going from a state of tum'ah to a state of tahara.
That's a very interesting comparison that you're making. The thing is that the laws are not exactly the same. Here we're telling you that you can't keep Shabbos if you're not Jewish. Okay, now doesn't mean that we're telling you to go into the Holy of Holies. You know what I mean? We're just telling you, are you allowed to keep Shabbos? So a non-Jew is not allowed to keep Shabbos. Here with the Kohen, you're talking about a case where he wants to go and eat truma. So in truth, your case is not exactly a contradiction, because we are telling him, you did go to mikvah. So in certain situations, you have lowered your level of impurity because you went to mikvah. He's not anymore called tameh, he's called a tvul yoin. So in a certain sense, he has left a certain level of impurity behind him, but he hasn't entered the state where he's allowed to eat truma. The story with the non-Jew who converted partially is pretty similar, actually. That he left the state of being not Jewish by having his circumcision in order for Judaism to become Jewish. He didn't do the mikvah yet, so he actually can't he's not a full Jew, and we're not going to count him in a minyan, but he did leave his status of being impure, and maybe he should be allowed to keep Shabbos. Again, we're not counting him for a minyan, we're not considering him Jewish to marry another Jewish woman, and so on, but we are maybe allowing him to keep Shabbos because he's no longer in a state of impurity of a non-Jew who's not allowed to keep Shabbos. That's where this dilemma comes. This touches on the dilemma. So again, your case is very interesting question that you're asking, but I think you could compare it there and work it out. Or it's not the extreme rule that he can't eat truma. I don't know if you're, in other words, I think your comparison of the fact that he can't eat truma to keeping Shabbos, I think that's where maybe you could tweak it a little and say, no, the comparison to eating truma would be like marrying a Jew, or eating truma would be like counting for a minyan. That maybe it would be, and really the fact that he left his state of tumah could be, you could compare that. So anyway, it's an interesting question you're asking.
But Rabbi, the situation is that the prohibition on a non-Jew is that he can't keep Shabbos.
Right.
Okay, so it's a strict prohibition.
Yeah,
The
but
same
is he a
thing holds
non-Jew?
true with a
We know he's
Kohen.
not Jewish, Ezra. He's not Jewish yet. But is he a non-Jew? Is there an in-between state? This is the question. Is there something called in-between?
Rabbi, can I say something about it?
I don't know who's first.
One
I had a
word,
question first.
just one word.
Who's first?
Me.
Okay.
So we have a person who's wants to convert. He has a circumcision, but he hasn't gone to the mikveh, and he passes away. He's not a Jew. He can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery, but he's not a Gentile. He can't be buried in a Gentile cemetery. What do you do? What's his status?
You want to know about where he's buried?
Well, I'm saying it's an interesting filling.
Yeah, I don't know if that would be a question. I mean, it's nice
He's
you
still
brought it
a
up.
goy.
The thing is, he's not Jewish yet, so he has no problem being buried in a non-Jewish cemetery.
Well, you just described him as being not a non-Jew.
Right, but
Not a Jew.
non-Jew doesn't need to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And not a non-Jew, we're just saying if he's allowed to keep Shabbos. You're taking it to mean, he can't even, he's not allowed to be buried. No, he doesn't have to put tefillin, he doesn't have to do anything. You know what I mean? I think you're taking it too far that he's,
Okay.
but okay, Ben, yes.
Yeah, I want to say the Cohen is Jewish, was Jewish, and will be Jewish. It's just a matter of a few more hours that he has to wait. But he doesn't have to do anything the ger has to do. He has to go and go into the mikvah. If he doesn't go into the mikvah, he'll never be Jewish.
I disagree
The
with
Kohen
Ben.
in a few hours will be Jewish.
I disagree with Ben. You say he
Okay.
doesn't have to do anything. Yes, he does. He has to wait until sundown. Okay,
Yeah,
so
but-
that's an act on his part.
Yeah, but with time, it'll happen. He doesn't have to do anything else.
Okay, so with time, he does tefillah as well. So,
No, Tvila, you have to go into the water.
yeah, okay, so the other one has to wait until the sun is down.
To me,
So
it's a big difference.
there has to be a second part that's completed before either in the Kohen's case, he eats truma, or in the ger's case, he becomes a full Jew.
Yeah, but eating truma is one thing. To be Jewish is another. He is Jewish. If he waits, he can eat. If he doesn't wait, he cannot eat. But he doesn't have to act or do anything else.
Waiting. That's
Yeah,
an act.
waiting is not.
Waiting is an act. You have to wait till the time goes by.
That is an act.
Anyway, I don't know if it's so important whether it is an act or it's not an act. The point is that the cases are not, it's not exactly the same case. The fact is that there are scenarios where a person could leave one status and enter in another status. And the question is, how does this work with the ger? Now, the source of this opinion is based on another Gemara. The Gemara talks about a ger who's not fully a ger. He did a bris, but he didn't do the dunk in the mikvah. And he wants to eat the korban pesach. He wants to eat the korban pesach. Now, the law is that the korban
can't
pesach, he's not allowed to eat. If he only did a circumcision, he didn't do the mikvah, the ger, he's not allowed to eat the korban pesach. The Gemara says this. The commentaries are all bothered. What do you mean he can't eat the korban pesach? Of course he can't eat the korban pesach. He's not allowed to. He's not Jewish. Anyone not Jewish is not allowed to eat the korban pesach, right? Ben nechor lo yochal boy. So if he's not Jewish, why is the Gemara telling us that he did a circumcision and he didn't do the mikvah and he's not allowed to eat the korban pesach? Of course he can't eat the korban pesach. So the Rashba on that Gemara says that the reason why the Gemara has to tell us this is because you might think he's allowed to eat the korban pesach because he's partially Jewish, because he already did the partial Judaism by entering the covenant with his circumcision. So that means there is a stage of being in between, and this is the source for this discussion, that there is such a stage of being somewhere in between, that because he already started it, there's a thought that he should be allowed to eat the korban pesach, and the Gemara has to tell you, no, he can't eat the korban pesach. He can't eat the paschal offering. But you would think that he might be able to, because there is some type of stage that's an in-between stage. And based on this Rashba is where this whole discussion comes in. And they say that there is a middle stage, and therefore he would be allowed to keep Shabbos. Yes, Avram.
Rabbi, the spiritual change happens in the mikveh.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't happen when I was the bris and everything. I didn't know when I was going to become Jewish, right? I didn't feel any differently like that. But the fact is the decision was made on the way to the mikveh.
Uh-huh.
I made a decision to carry on when they were saying it's okay if you want to drop out. But the actual spiritual change, which I really felt dramatically, was in the mikveh. So there's not really a halfway. There's a halfway in the sense you made a mental decision to carry on with it.
Uh-huh.
There's no spiritual change. That's what I found.
So that's a very interesting point. And it's not really a contradiction to what we're saying, because everyone is in agreement that the person is not considered a Jew until he goes to the mikvah, as you experienced. But is it possible that he leaves the impurity or the status of being a not Jew at the circumcision? He doesn't enter the Jewish status, which would be a feeling of holiness or experience of holiness. He doesn't get that yet. But maybe he left that category of being considered a non-Jew when he circumcises himself in order to convert. And because he's in that in-between stage, he might have certain rules that might change because he's not a non-Jew. He's not Jewish, but he's also not a non-Jew. So we're dealing with the question, is there such a status? And according to the Rajba, now there are other commentaries that explain things differently. But according to this explanation of the Rajba and that Gemara, that he can't eat the Korban Pesach, and the reason why it mentions that he can't eat the Korban Pesach is to tell us this unique law. That would be to tell us is the reason he can't. The reason why there's a law, because you might think otherwise. You might think he would be allowed to eat the Korban Pesach because of this fact that there is a middle stage, and it might allow him to eat the Korban Pesach. He's not considered a non-Jew, and therefore there's reason to say that maybe he should be except. And the Gemara has to tell you he's not able to eat the Korban Pesach. Now, based on that, there's room to say that he's allowed to keep Shabbos. Now, I have to tell you that this also connects to the law. When did we get the law of Shabbos? The laws of Shabbos were given to us before Mount Sinai. So the Jewish people, we also converted to Judaism. And we did a circumcision when we left Egypt. And we got the laws of Shabbos in Marah. So what about us? We did a circumcision. We got the laws of Shabbos before Mount Sinai. And at Mount Sinai is when we did the dunk in the mikvah. So what about us? Did we do a keeping Shabbos before the giving of the Torah? If we did, we kept Shabbos. It must be that we were allowed to keep Shabbos because it must be that we were allowed to keep Shabbos. Because we got the laws of Shabbos before we did the mikvah. So you see from there that there's a possibility of a non-Jew keeping Shabbos even without going to the mikvah. Because the fact that we went to the mikvah is learned from the sprinkling of the blood that was done by the giving of the Torah. So this would imply like we were able to keep Shabbos even without the mikvah. So this would be a further proof to this statement. Now I have to take it even a step further. There is a statement in the Zohar that says that when they were at Marah, they finished off the circumcision. That means that the circumcision was not completed when they were leaving Egypt. There was a little part of the circumcision that had to be, it's called Priya, Mila and Priya. There's a certain part of the circumcision that has to be folded backwards. And basically it was done at Marah. So the Zohar says that they finished the circumcision at Marah, which adds to this idea that they were circumcised exactly before they kept Shabbos. They did their circumcision right before Marah, where they were given the laws of Shabbos. So this adds to this idea that keeping Shabbos after circumcision before the mikvah should be permissible. Yes, Simone.
So I just want to actually follow up on what Avram said, because I have a number of female friends who converted, and they all expressed how at the conversion there was that sense of a spiritual change. So that's an important thing, because obviously women don't have bris milah, but so the mikveh itself is the conversion, and that therefore, in a sense, you could say is the equivalent process that that they both male and females go through in order to become Jews.
Very nice. Okay, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, interesting. Yes, Susan.
I'm very conflicted because all of these rules this rule about this man was only circumcised and was not immersed. Is that a biblical or is that a rabbinic?
It's a biblical law. In order to be Jewish, you need to have both.
And yet you're saying that the Jewish people didn't complete the final thing until after.
Until near the giving of the Torah.
Right. So
Until by the giving of the Torah, which is not surprising, because the giving of the Torah is when they became obligated in the mitzvahs. And so They,
So
you
why
know,
do we
they-
treat, so why are we treating somebody that wants to become a Jew, go through the physical process, and that we still don't consider them Jewish? They can't.
until they finish it, right?
Until they
It's
go
almost
to
like,
immersion. I think it's. I
yeah, you
don't
think
know.
it's wrong? How about if you're filling out your immigration papers and you didn't finish filling them out, you didn't sign it yet, you didn't get it approved, but you're trying to be American, why can't we, how dare we not consider you American? That's not right. You're in the middle of filling
Just
out the.
walk across the
me ask you
border. That's all
something.
you gotta
Let me ask you something. When you're talking about immersion, in other words, you're talking about just going into the mikveh and being put underwater, or is it more than that?
No, it's just going into the mikvah with people with the judges seeing that you dunked. That's all.
And there's no ceremony?
Nope.
But you're making,
No
you're
kiddush in the
making a
mikvah.
bracha.
You
Rabbi,
are
you're
making
making
a
a bracha.
blessing?
Oh, you say a blessing.
So, and
The
then just
blessing
give
is
you-
That's
we're
that's why I'm
claiming, you're
asking
saying
what all
God's
this
name.
is.
I mean,
One second,
you know,
Abraham speaking. Abraham, what?
Ignorant.
when during my conversion, I wasn't sure I'd have to dunk or not, right? And the rabbi was holding the rail above me, and he went through. I had to make oaths to be able to keep Shabbos and all that. And when I went under the mikveh, as the water closed over my head, the rabbi was shaking, so I was told. And he said, he's now Jewish. And he said that he went back into his office and cried because it was an amazing experience to see a new Jew coming onto the planet. So that's the technical thing I had to go over my head. At that moment, split second, I changed from Gentile to a Jew, which is a true miracle. It's one of the true miracles that occurs every time today. You can witness it.
Wow.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Okay. So I guess my time is up. Okay, we'll see you later, Mirz Hashem. Sei gesund. Thank you all for your
Rebbe.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
Everybody.